Committee. Thank you all for joining us this morning, because we're slightly out of sync. We don't normally meet at this time on a Monday morning, but we're into the schedule of annual accounts. So at the moment, I don't think I have any apologies from anyone, Elaine or Mark, any updates?
No.
No apologies, and if I just keep speaking through the formality bits and pieces, there we have, and Alan has joined us just on time. I was just covering apologies, Alan, so you've snuck in there before it. Thank you. Welcome. And do we have any declarations of interest this morning? No. No. That makes sense, given we are an audit committee. We've got a fairly tight remit, so that's helpful. Thank you. So that moves us on to the first item, but before that, it is me, so it all goes a bit topsy-turvy, isn't it, in terms of agenda items. So you've got me, but as we're about to cover a key item, just thank you to Jacqueline for covering the chair role over the last couple of years, and you're back to me again this morning, which shouldn't be a surprise for those of you in the IJB, but we'll formally cover it off. So I'll hand over to Mark to cover item 1 this morning.
Thank you. It's a very, very simple report which sets out the terms of the movement between the chair and vice chair positions, and it asks for approval of that change.
Thank you. And that was previously picked up at the IJB, Mark, as well. So we're sort of, in effect, we're enacting that this morning. So thank you again to Jacqueline, who took us through pre-agenda and got us set up for this, because there's been lots going on in the background to get us to this meeting. So thank you for that. Okay. That then takes us on to item 2 of the agenda, which is minutes of the previous meeting. So that was held on the 23rd of June. So you have the minutes before you. So just looking to, if there are any issues with the minute, or if we're happy to approve. So first of all, any comments or questions on the minute? Don't see any hands or questions, so I take it on that basis we are content to approve the minute of the previous meeting. I see nods on screen. Thank you for that. So the committee approves that minute. Thank you. So that takes us on to the body of business this morning, which is item 3, and we've got our annual audit report on the account. So Sarah, it's your agenda item, but you may want to pass on quickly. I'll let you introduce them.
Okay, yes, it's actually the report by the external auditors, and Rob Jones and Grace Scanlon are here today, and they can talk to the report. So my report's just really a cover report to say here is the report, and that they will talk to the report and the highlights of the audit that they carried out, hopefully. So it's probably better for me just to hand over to them right away. So I don't know who's taking it forward. I presume it's Rob, right? So hand over to Rob.
And for the benefit of members and the wider committee, we had the opportunity to have a brief private meeting with the external audit prior to this meeting, which is just a standard process. So we've had the opportunity to make sure that there's nothing that they need to draw to our attention. So thank you for that. Rob, why don't you take us through your paper?
Thanks, Jo. Thanks, Sarah. So as Sarah said, this is our annual audit report for the 22-23 financial year audit, summarising the key conclusions and messages from our audit work. That's both in respect of our financial statements audit work and our wider scope responsibilities under the Audit Scotland Code of Practice. Members will see that the report is noted as provisional on the front page. All our reports are technically provisional until we finalise them and update them on signing the financial statements, which we anticipate to do in the next couple of weeks, issuing an unqualified audit opinion, but I'll talk about that as I go through the report. We've outlined the key messages in our report in the first couple of pages, but I'll really just talk through the key areas that I wanted to draw to the committee's attention, and then very happy to take any questions. On page 5 of our report, which is page 22 of the pack, we've confirmed that our audit work, and in particular the materiality that we applied to the audit, was the same as that which we communicated to the committee back in March with our annual audit plan, so no revisions were required in that respect. On page 8 of our report, so page 25 of the pack, we've outlined the audit outcomes from the financial statements, noting that we had one minor disclosure difference, which management has corrected. And we also made one recommendation, which again, I'll get to as I run through the appendices of the report. From page 10 of our report, we've outlined the key sections of our audit opinion and our conclusions in that respect on pages 10 and 11. Again, noting that we have no matters, no modifications or amendments to make, and that we intend to issue an unqualified audit opinion on signing the financial statements. And then on page 12, in respect of our response to the significant audit and fraud risks that we identified as part of our audit planning, we've outlined our procedures and conclusions in respect of that work. No material changes were noted, pending one final confirmation from the NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde Director of Finance on one of the balances with, or the interbalances with that entity. We have no outstanding procedures to note, and no matters to raise either in respect of the risk of management override. Again, I'd just refer back to our audit plan that these are presumed audit risks under auditing standards, so no reflection on the IJB, but it is a requirement for auditors that we presume these risks are in place. So that's what drives our procedures around those. On page 14 of our report, which is page 31 of the pack, I think, we've outlined that management did identify as part of its preparation of the accounts an error with the prior year balances in the 21-22 financial statements in respect of the remuneration report. So they've corrected that, and we have audited that and are comfortable that the updated numbers are now correct for both the current year and the prior year balance. We've outlined our requirements in respect of going concern with no matters to raise, and also in respect of the procedures that we're required to complete this year under new auditing standards. So that's referred to as ISA 315, again with no material matters or no significant weaknesses to raise. So that's everything in respect of the financial statements audit. With respect to our best value and wider scope audit work, we've set out our conclusions there, including our RAG ratings, which we've explained on page 17 of our report, in respect of the wider scope areas of responsibility that we have under the Code of Audit Practice set by Audit Scotland. So these are around financial management, financial sustainability, vision, leadership and governance, and the use of resources to improve outcomes. And accumulating in our overall assessment of the arrangements in place to consider and demonstrate best value at the IJB. As you can see through the report, we have rated as green financial management, use of resources and vision, leadership and governance. And we have rated as red, perhaps unsurprisingly, the financial sustainability position at the IJB, again reflecting in our overall assessment just the significant challenges facing the IJB in recent years, which has resulted in the requirement to use reserves below, to the point where they are now below the board's target levels, and also the continued expected financial challenges and significant external risk factors facing the IJB going forward. Albeit recognising that there is a significant amount of work ongoing and being delivered in respect of continuing to deliver those savings as required in respect of the IJB's Sustainable Futures programme. And then, as I said, as I mentioned previously, our wider scope work impacts our overall assessment of, or informs our overall assessment of the IJB's arrangements in place to demonstrate best value. We've noted on page 31 of our report that in our view the IJB's performance management and financial reporting arrangements do allow the board to demonstrate the achievement of best value. However, we note the sort of significant risk, again, the kind of pervasive risk, I suppose, that the financial sustainability challenges and risk factors going forward place around the achievement of best value going forward. Our appendices to our reports fill out our reporting and communication requirements to those charged with governance. I wasn't going to go into a huge amount of detail there. Obviously, Appendix A fills out our responsibilities in respect of the Code of Audit Practice, and Appendix B summarises our independence to act as your auditors. And then I suppose the only thing I was going to draw attention to was the action plan in Appendix E, where we've identified a number of actions which we've agreed responses with management in respect to arrangements around hosted services across the Greater Glasgow area going forward, the continued requirement to focus on medium-term financial planning, and also something which I know will be addressed through the committee, or start to be addressed through the committee today, in respect of CIPFA, the response to CIPFA's updating its guidance on good practice for local authority audit committees. And then finally, Appendix F, we've outlined the adjusted and unadjusted audit differences, which both of which I've mentioned previously. That was everything I was going to say. Very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for that run through, because I'm sure everyone has read it, but that gives us a really helpful overview of the key items. And I guess for us, this is a particularly important report for this committee. It brings together a lot of the assurance that we need in advance of recommending approval of the annual accounts, and gives us a really good summary of what has happened financially and some of the operational aspects during the year. So thank you for that. Obviously, open it up for questions. I'm not seeing any hands going up just now. I guess for me, and we talked about it briefly at pre-agenda, for me, I wasn't at all surprised about the red rating on the financial sustainability aspect. And it does form a lot of the discussions that we're having, both formally in the IJB in our development sessions, and probably is replicated across every IJB in the country. I would be surprised if it's not. If it's not, I want to know who's not. But then the bit that I struggled a bit in the report with, because I felt it wasn't really articulated very clearly, was the best value amber. And I suppose I was hoping for that to draw out a bit more detail as to why it's amber, because it seems that the reason seems to reflect the same reasons on financial sustainability. So I find it quite hard to really understand why best value is amber from what's written in the report. So can you explain it a bit more detail?
No, absolutely. So the first thing I will say is, well, to what you said, Chair, there, obviously, I think the financial sustainability piece, I mean, they're all publicly available reports, and we can confirm that the three IJBs that we audit will all be in the same position in that respect. Maybe to slightly different scales in terms of savings and reserves, but all with the same position. It's very unlikely, or we would expect that is the case across most of the country for obvious reasons, and just the nature of some of the external risk factors and uncertainties. It seems very unlikely that will go away anytime soon, to be completely honest. You're right in terms of the best value area. I think from our point of view, obviously the nature of the IJB work, or the nature of the work we do around best value for IJBs, does draw very heavily on the wider scope dimensions, audit dimensions that we're required to complete. And I suppose the key factor for us is obviously just that risk, or just the kind of, I suppose, pervasive risk that the financial sustainability risk brings to the to the ability to deliver services and demonstrate best value. I think it's, well, given that the nature of the sort of the financial challenges going forward, there's a significant risk of there requiring to be reductions in services, there requiring to be other savings that are made on top of the sort of historic savings that have been required to be made for a significant period of time now, and that being the sort of the key driver, I suppose, for the risk going forward. I would say finally, sorry, having said all of that, I do think it's management did, obviously they were very supportive and very constructive in reviewing the report and discussing it with. I think it's fair to say that management had a similar view in terms of the how the amber rating of best value came across in the report. And I will say it is something that we are discussing in terms of simply the RAG rating process for best value with Audit Scotland, prior to finalising our work and our report. I think our consideration is that it's clearly a risk that should be drawn out in terms of the risk to best value going forward. But I do recognise I suppose the perception or the view that basically it feels like you're, I suppose, being this might not be quite the right phrasing, but almost like marked down twice for the same thing. And I do recognise that. I do think it's important that we draw, because best value ultimately, I wouldn't want, over the course of a 5-year audit appointment for us to be saying everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine, and then eventually, the financial, the financial strain kind of, hits a point where we say actually there's an issue with best value. So I do think drawing out that risk is appropriate. But I do think, but we do take that on board, and we are, I suppose, ultimately discussing, or we're going to confirm with Audit Scotland if essentially we need to rag rate the best value side of it specifically, or just essentially report what we've reported, to not give that, I suppose, not give that impression that I suppose led to the question, Chair.
Yeah, and I think that's when I was reading it, I was like, so right, okay, so what is it that's triggering this? And I was left sort of a bit hanging, and I suppose that's, you've articulated that fairly well, and probably why the rag rating doesn't quite exactly make sense. It's quite a blunt instrument for quite a complicated picture, but that's helpful if you're picking that up.
Yeah, we take that on board. I think, again, I think the overall, I mean, in terms of, I suppose, the words on the page, that we'll take it back and take it away in terms of context as well. But I think in terms of the words of the page, I do think it's important to recognise, obviously, the clear impact that the financial sustainability risk will have on best value going forward if it's not addressed. But I do recognise the point about the rag rating of the best value specifically. So essentially, if Audit Scotland, from a central guidance point of view, if they're comfortable with us not specifically rag rating best value, then we won't do it.
Okay. I suppose just my final comment is not that I'm averse to anything that's not green all the way. It was just that sort of mismatch there, because certainly when I read it, it made sense that the sustainability piece was read. So thank you. Sure. Any other questions from the committee? I don't see any hands going up. It probably reflects what we've seen through the year, and perhaps reflects what we're expecting coming through. I see Fiona nodding there, and also helpfully from what's written and certainly what we discussed briefly privately, that the audit has gone smoothly and there's been good cooperation. So that's really helpful to hear. And I guess I'm happy to say that there were no matters raised privately that we needed to bring up here. Alan, I'll bring you in now.
Thanks, Margaret. No, it was really just a sort of public perception sort of side of things. The amount of graft that's going on in order to keep the IJB satisfied that all the work's been done in order to reduce that potential issue in relation to budgets and reserves being utilised, etc. And then there's a big marker, basically. It's just. I know we've got. This is a public document. We have to make sure that there's a sense that, we recognise that all the staff are pulling at all the stops to do what they can, yet we've still got this big red marker on it. So it's just a sort of perception thing for me. And we understand completely this was expected in some degree, and it should come out in the audit. That's the position, but it's just to make sure that when we're voicing this and we're putting those out there, people know, people are aware that everybody's working as hard as possible, more at full 100%, just to try to reduce it, but there isn't a lot of room to manoeuvre. So it's really just a perception thing for me. But thanks, Margaret.
Thanks, Alan. And I guess that's why this is one of a number of reports that form part of what goes forward to the IJB, both within the annual audit report. We've got performance aspects, we've got other regular reporting. So the IJB itself does get a balance across all of the reporting. So with this, I don't see any other hands. So I guess at that point we're noting your report this morning from the auditors, and then it forms part of the assurance that we can take forward in terms of the next item, which is the accounts themselves. So back to you, Sarah.
Okay, so I won't go through this in detail because you'll have all seen the accounts in June, and there's very little difference between the accounts in June and the ones that are presented before you here. They reflect the comments that Rob and Grace had made in their audit report, and they also include some minor adjustments to a couple of the figures. And today you're asked to consider the accounts before you and to agree to submit them to the IJB for approval and signature at the end of September. But I'm happy to take any questions anyone has on the accounts, because obviously, you know, there are a lot of pages there, but I won't go through them, as I said, because you've already been through them earlier on this year.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think thanks formally to the rest of the team. Got Shannon on the call as well this morning, because there is a huge amount of work that goes into producing these. I think we see this every year, but we do recognise that. And certainly any of the presentational updates and tweaks just help to make these documents a tad more readable, because there's an awful lot of information in them. And as you see, there hasn't been very much that's changed. Although I think it was in the private session that the auditors did comment that these are actually more readable than many others, because there's really good use of the diagrams and graphs and just even spacing, just to make it slightly less daunting to read these documents, because there's such a lot of information in them. So certainly through the course of the last few months, any questions and even the daft questions about how all these recharges and things work, thank you for coming back to me on those, Sarah. But none of my questions merit raising within the formal committee. It's more for helping my understanding. Certainly I don't have any other questions on them. I don't see any other hands, which means we don't approve these. We recommend them to the IJB, who will then be approving them on behalf of all members at our next meeting. But I guess what we are saying is we are satisfied that we've had the opportunity in this committee to scrutinise them and question auditors or follow up with management, anything that we have, which we certainly have had the opportunity. So thank you all, both the finance team and the auditors, for getting to this place, because we're well ahead of deadlines at the moment as well. So with that, we're recommending or submitting them to the IJB for further approval.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done, everyone. Thank you. You can sigh slight relief. They're nearly signed.
Nearly there, yes.
Nearly there. So that then finishes off the external aspect of our reporting, and then we pick up on internal audit. So item 5 in the agenda, and I'll hand over to Andrea this morning.
Thank you very much. As you know, item 5 is just our progress report. Really nothing to add to it, and we are just looking for the report to be noted in terms of the progress that we've made so far this year.
Thanks, Andrea. I think it's always helpful. We don't meet that frequently, so it just gives all the members just a wee chance as a reminder of where things are at. So it's a good status for us. So I don't see any hands, so we're happy to note the progress report. Thank you. So moving on to item 6.
So yes, item 6 is the audit of risk management that was undertaken. It was actually part of last year's audit plan, but wasn't completed until into this year. The work was actually undertaken, it was outsourced to Audit, who did that work for us, and produced the report which management have seen and have commented on. So there was 2 important recommendations. The remaining recommendations were really good practice, housekeeping type recommendations. So management have agreed to implement both of the important recommendations by November, and the majority of the good practice ones by November as well. There is one recommendation in the good practice category that they want to take a little bit longer over, just with all of the change to the risk management processes that have happened over the last year or so. I think they just want to take that one a wee bit longer to take more of a look at it. So I'm happy to answer any questions on that reports for noting.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, this is a helpful one, and it was one of the things I commented on at pre-agenda, so you've put in the dates for when work is due to be completed. I think for us as a committee, it's quite important that we don't get into the detail of everything, but we need to know that actions are being followed up and that we've got that visibility, so that's helpful. Again, open up for any questions or comments, or David, if you want to come in, if there's anything you want to raise on that, or we can pick up later in the risk report. I don't mind.
Thanks, Margaret. I'll note, and just kind of following on from Andrea's points, I think the recommendations that were made were, nothing was fundamental in our perspective. I think it's really about us just kind of cementing good practice and the work that we've been doing over recent years to improve our risk framework. So yeah, we were very happy with the report and the recommendations that have been made.
That's helpful. And I think through this committee and the IJB itself, we've seen a lot of progress around the reporting and visibility of how risks are being managed. That's been helpful. Don't see any other questions or any other hands up. So we're happy to note that report, and we'll see, certainly we'll have plenty of opportunity to see updates coming through on the risk aspects and the development sessions that have been agreed to take place. Okay, thank you. So we'll note that report. Thanks, Andrea, on risk. And then it takes us on to item 7, which is still with you, Andrea. Oh, you're still on mute.
Okay, so again, this is a report that comes to the IJB regular, and it's just an update from partner organisations in relation to the work that's been undertaken by the internal audit teams of the partner organisations. Being the Chief Auditor of Renfrewshire Council, I can speak a bit to the Renfrewshire Council audits, and you'll see there that 2 of those were actually limited. Now, they're limited very much in relation to the specific scopes that were looked at. The business continuity plans, which we were kind of specifically looking around what they had in place for should there be ICT system outages. So they were found a bit wanting in terms of being up to date, being comprehensive, etc. So management have agreed to implement the recommendations in that, and that is overseen by our crisis and resilience management team, who have developed templates, and the whole thing is being refreshed, frankly. Cybersecurity was reasonable, and I'm happy about that. I suppose the one that might cause some confusion is in relation to the information asset register, which is as limited. Now, I have to be really clear that that is only limited in terms of what we looked at, and the only thing we looked at was the requirements to maintain an asset register for information assets, which complies with Article 30 of GDPR. So we're not suggesting that there is a problem within the council on GDPR at all. It was just that some of the aspects of recording what those information assets were and what they related to could be improved. It was more of an oversight issue. They were a bit out of date in some cases. So they really needed to have a bit more oversight, and we've asked for sign-off at senior management level that these information assets have been reviewed at least annually in that case. But it's a very narrow scope, so it had a limited category to a very narrow scope. Obviously, I can't speak to the audits that have been undertaken from Greater Glasgow and Clyde's internal auditors, but you know, they're noted out there in terms of what has been in their reports that has gone to their audit committees, and also their annual report. I've just included what the overall opinion was from the internal auditors in terms of their annual report as well. I'm happy to take any questions, and the report is for noting.
Thanks, Andrea. I've got Fiona first. Come to you.
Thanks, Andrea. It's just in relation to the information asset register. What you were saying was you had made some recommendations, and I just wondered how had that been received by the head of service, and were they going to be taking some action, or did they give you reassurance in terms of that?
Yes, all of the recommendations were agreed with implementation dates, and we do follow-up on that. So no, there was no issues, there was no kickback or anything on the recommendations. It was actually the service had asked for this to be looked at in terms of, they thought there might just have been a few tweaks that were needed. So their view was right, so they were happy to implement the recommendations that we made.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks for that. And I guess just as a reminder, I guess it's the oddity of how the IJB works, that operationally the underlying partner organisations retain responsibility for the follow-up and the implementation of all these actions as well. So this is just helpful understanding for us to see where there might be impacts for us. Thank you for that, Andrea. No other questions for that, so we'll note that report. And moving on to your next item. So we're on to item 8.
Thank you. I suppose this is the one that people haven't seen before in terms of regular reports. Rob had said that there was an action in the external auditor's action plan in relation to just confirming that we are complying with the new CIPFA guidance in relation to audit committees. It is significantly meatier guidance than has previously been in place, and I'm satisfied really that we're broadly there. I don't think there's anything fundamental within the audit committee that really needs to be addressed, but we do really have to do that self-assessment. So I'm suggesting that we do it in 2 parts in relation to the 2 appendices that are attached to my report. So with the first appendix really being tackled by myself, the clerk to the committee, the chair of the committee, and officers might be asked to put some input in to certain parts of it. But broadly, those questions, they're quite administrative questions. You know, do you do this, do you do that type questions. So I don't think it necessarily merits the input of all members at this stage. It'd be more bringing all members in if we found something that we wanted to discuss further. I'm just very conscious that you know, everybody's diaries are rather busy. However, in relation to the second question set that should be really going through, I do think that merits a discussion with all members through a sort of development session. I'm thinking, and Margaret, you might have thoughts as well, but I was thinking about a half day should probably do it. There's kind of 10 areas, but they're quite they merit a bit of discussion over the areas. It's not really the same as the previous appendix, which is quite it's quite, you know, we that are or aren't, or we are kind of partially doing something. They really relate to impact and effectiveness of the audit committee. So I think there is a necessity for all of the members to have input to that. So if that is accepted by the members, what I'm really looking for is a date where we could be looking at having a sort of half-day session, unless anybody thinks it should be less or more than that, but that kind of felt about right to me. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts, but I'll just kick off while everyone has a chance to gather their ideas. Certainly, I was asked in advance, I'm happy to feed in. I agree. The first self-assessment bit is kind of factual. Do you do it or do you not? There's not as much judgment involved. So we'll just be looking at looking back and seeing, have we done these things? And it will be fairly binary. So I'm happy to help in that. The other thing that I did flag is that I think we should also be clear where there are aspects that are actually not appropriate for this audit committee. We are not like a normal public sector body like the council or the health board. We have quite a unique position in that we don't employ staff, and we don't own the systems and the buildings and all that goes with it. So there are some aspects that might not apply. I've not been through it. I'm just assuming there'll be things in the same way that we look at our partner bodies' activities. So we've got a bit of an unusual position. but there'll be merit in us thinking about it and identifying if there are things that we don't think are appropriate, but we should document why. So I think that will be a helpful thing as well. And timing, yeah, my question was, when will we do this? And I guess we want to do it in this financial year. Would that be right?
I would suggest, if possible, it would be best to do it by the end of the calendar year. And my reasoning for that is so that it can feature in the next governance statement that we have done it, and we would have by that point a clear action plan in place if there were any areas that needed to be taken forward. So I think you'd want to be in that position by about February. So if we had the actual development day before the end of the calendar year, that would give us some room to create the action plan and come back and, you know, make sure everybody was happy with that before we basically write the annual governance statement for next year.
Sounds good to me. Any questions, comments for anyone? No. So we're content to proceed on that basis with Andrea's suggestions, and we'll let you proceed with getting some time in the diary.
Okay, maybe if we can ask Elaine if she could sort of put out something for preferred dates, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Elaine. I saw your nod. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. That concludes all your reports this morning. Okay.
Yes.
So that moves us on to item 9. So picking up on risk management again. So David.
Thanks, Chair. So this paper follows a similar structure to previous updates, and it outlines the range of activity that we've been progressing. We also, as we talked about on the previous papers, we briefly reflect on the outcomes of the internal audit of the IJB's risk management arrangements. And in the paper, we provide a summary of the actions that we'll be taking forward. In terms of the risk and issue registers themselves, there's a number of key updates that we wanted to flag. So risks 1 and 2 and issue 2, which all cover the IJB's financial resilience, as you'll be aware, are already at the highest rating available. But in those, we have reflected the work being undertaken on sustainable futures, and that links back to and is aligned with the risk that was identified in the external auditors' reports as well. I think it's important, though, just to note, whilst we've rated those at the highest rating available, that it is expected and there is a risk that the HSEP and the IJB will need to look for further savings beyond the scope of the Sustainable Futures programme as it currently stands. And that is a necessarily broad and complex programme, but we will continue to look at how that scope needs to extend as we progress. We've also kept risk 5 relating to COVID open, despite agreeing at the previous meeting that that would be closed. That reflects the increased infection rates that we're seeing in the community, and also an emergence of a new variant. So it is reasonable for us to maintain that on the risk register, and also reflect the fact that we're moving into the winter period as well. We've reduced the rating of risk 6, which is related to the establishment of the National Care Service, and that's given expected extension of the timescales of the work for the NCS into the next parliamentary period, and also recent agreement between the Scottish Government, NHS and local government around shared accountabilities moving forward. We've looked to decrease the rating of risk 15, which is related to compliance with essential training, and that reflects progress that we've made over recent months in addressing that. And then finally, we've also added a new risk, which is risk 19, which is related to the potential for a new pandemic resulting from viruses which are different to COVID. So this has been added as it really reflects changes made to the UK government's National Risk Register. And so aligning our own risk register with that reflects good practice. However, it is important to note, I think, for the committee that it's not intended to signal any increased risk of another pandemic happening in the near future, but it's important for us to reflect on that. So based on the changes we made to the risk register, we're asking for the committee to approve the changes that have been made, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. It's a really detailed paper. I always find it quite helpful, although I have to say it's fairly depressing. One day your reports are going to fill me with a bit more light-hearted news, but yeah, the risks are all quite heavy, aren't they? Would that be fair? Reflecting where we are, but it was hard to disagree with any of the ratings and where they're at. I don't see any questions from members. I certainly find it a good snapshot of it, sort of providing an overview of my understanding of where everything's at. The NCS one's an interesting one because that was one that we thought would be ramping up more, but actually it's not. But here we are still increasing the risk around pandemic risk again, which is again not really surprising given all the indicators we're seeing. So certainly I'm happy to approve, and I don't see any questions or thoughts otherwise. See shakes of head. So committee's happy to note the report and approve the updates that have been made to the risks. So thank you for that, David.
Thank you.
Okay. That takes us on to item 10, our update on health and safety. Now, I had a note that Pauline's on holiday, but she's disappeared from my screen. There you are. You are on my screen. You are here. So welcome. So I'll hand over to you, Pauline.
Okay, thank you. This paper is to provide a health and safety update of our incident reporting from the 1st of January to the 30th of June. It's quite a short paper, and the committee's asked to note the content. The information that has been reported here has been pulled from a variety of systems, and that includes the NHS Datex system, Council Business World, and NHS Workforce dashboards. I think it's important to note as well that we've got, as you read through the paper, you'll notice there's some reporting omissions from their Business World system, and that's resulted in some that's been the result of an improvement to that. It seems ridiculous, but an improvement to that system that's affected some of the reporting. However, if I can give the committee some reassurance around the front-facing application of these incidents within council services, that these are visible to managers. We're just not able to give a report on them in its wider sense, and they are working on making those improvements. So from the first 6 months of the year, we had an increase in incidents that have been reported across both systems. We saw a 20% increase in NHS services and a 38% increase across social care. When we look at the breakdown of incidents, we can see, and they're just about the same as previous reports, that 74% involve our clients and 22% involve our staff. And in the top 5 incident categories, there remains the same top 5, although there's been a positions change, with slips, trips and falls remaining at the top, but a change from self-harm, a change from self-harm and violence and aggression. They've swapped around in this first half of the year. I think really importantly, they're acknowledging that those 3 high incident categories and the volume of incidents across them, with significant training in place to try and help our staff to remain safe, and that includes training around violence and aggression, particularly across the areas where there's higher prevalence, such as our mental health services, and we were supporting staff with violence reduction and de-escalation strategies. And there's also training that we're supporting all staff to attend again in these areas around ligation training, with an e-learning module now in place. And with slips, trips and falls, each one's investigated, and we look at the risk assessments and what's progressing around sharing of those risk assessments. And that's really recognising that a lot of these particular incidents do happen out in the community, with a high volume of our staff visiting clients out in the community, and to see if we can share some learning across services. Of the volume of incidents, we had 10 in the first half of the year that were serious adverse events, which are incidents that would either did or could have caused significant harm. We have had a very strong escalation process in place, and also a methodical root cause analysis process to investigate these incidents, as well as the process in place to not only share the incidents with the learning of those incidents within the services, but across the organisation as a whole, to try and mitigate that happening again in another area. And there's details there around the types of incidents. Again, we also had 11 RIDDOR investigations carried out, and you will see from the paper that many of them fall under the slips, trips and falls categories, hence the work around risk assessments and sharing the learning with all our staff groups. I think significantly across the last 6 months, there's been changes across fire safety, with a lot of work being done to support staff to understand the new Scottish Fire and Rescue response to non-sleeping premises. There's been a significant amount of work around that, and there's also been when looking at our fire safety audit compliance, which you will see has rose from 59% in December 22 to 86% in June. However, if we take the premises that are not opened off that, our compliance is sitting at 100%. Local fire testing is not taking taking place across the pandemic. So each premises was scheduled to have at least one fire test this year to comply to ensure they comply with the fire safety. And although that's not documented in this report, that is actually completed now. Obviously, part of the incidents management training is about our health and safety compliance and our training compliance. So when we look at health and safety training, we can see that that's improved over the last year, with most mandatory and statutory training sitting at 90%, though we have noticed some drops recently around information governance and fire safety, and service managers are working hard to support their staff to improve that. And so additionally, the priority training, that's a focus for the health and safety commitments, both across wider GD&C and locally within Renfrewshire, to improve the training around sharps, moving and handlings and falls for those staff that are in scope. And I think additionally, we do know that there's some housekeeping to done across our Learn Pro profiles that staff need to do themselves, and we know that if that can be done, that'll increase all our figures by 4%, which will push a number of us over that target compliance figure. And again, managers are supporting their staff to be able to do that. I don't think there's anything else I need to say. I'm just looking for the committee to note this report, and if there's any questions for clarity, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Pauline. That's a really thorough run through of everything. Do we have any questions for Pauline this morning? No questions, and I think that just reflects that. We're hearing lots of actions to be taken to improve a number of the metrics. So that's very positive. So thank you for that. And the committee is content to note the report. Thank you, Pauline. Okay. That takes us on to our item 11, which is public interactions report. And John, handing over to you on that one.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the full year public interactions report, and this report covers the period from April 22 to the end of March 23. It includes a report on complaints, inquiries, freedom of information requests, subject access requests. It also includes an update on our main channels of communication, as well as some compliments that were received within the period as well. And this report is for noting today. So at the introduction at 3.2, I've actually produced an overview of the numbers over the last 3 years to give an idea of the volume of each of these and the trend over the past 3 years. So starting with complaints, for this period, we had 228 complaints. That's an increase of 32% from the previous period. But over the 2-year period, that's an increase of just over 100%. We see the increase due to a combination of factors, including higher demand for HSCP services, which we've noted before, at the same time as staff capacity challenges resulting from recruitment and retention difficulties, as well as staff absences. Moving on to inquiries, we've actually had quite a significant decrease in the number, a 28% decrease in the number of inquiries. The main reason for this is a kind of large reduction in the number of inquiries we're getting relating to COVID and flu vaccination type issues. I think generally the number of inquiries has decreased, but that's the most significant reason for that drop. Subject access requests and freedom of information requests, they are pretty static numbers. They haven't really moved significantly. Subject access requests are down very slightly, and freedom of information requests have risen by a small amount as well. Just looking very quickly at the themes, starting with complaints, the main kind of areas where we're receiving complaints is very similar to previous years actually. Podiatry, community mental health and CAMS being the kind of main areas that those are the kind of highest numbers of complaints we receive across the HSCP, although it must be noted in this report that CAMS is now hosted in East Dunbartonshire HSCP. So this is the last year that we will actually be reporting on CAMS in this report. We will reflect the future numbers just to acknowledge that change and kind of so that it's consistent over the trend piece moving forward. In terms of inquiries, again, a very similar picture to the previous year, with the main kind of themes being individuals inquiring about their own care and treatment, as well as OT adaptations, and those being the kind of the main areas that we're receiving inquiries from there. In terms of performance with complaints and inquiries, over the piece, I think for complaints, this is the figure. There is a lot of detail in the report about the breakdown, but within the kind of performance report that we do annually, the overarching figure is 84% against a target of 70%. So despite an increase in the number of complaints, we're still managing to turn them around well within the kind of target timescales, although it is a slight drop from the 90% that we had the previous year. So we'll look to kind of hopefully try and restore that. With inquiries, 81% were completed within the timescales. Just to point out, the average timescale has actually risen to 6 working days, and the main reason for that is the kind of increase in the average turnaround time for inquiries within timescales, which went up from 4.3 days last year to 5 days this year. So that meant that the average number has increased, although the actual absolute number of inquiries that were responded to out with timescales actually fell by 37% from 63 this year, down from 100 last year. So those were the kind of main key points I wanted to call out in the paper. There is quite a lot of detail in the other sections, but I'm happy to take any further questions on the report.
Thanks, John. That's really helpful. I've got Jacqueline coming in first. Thanks, Jacqueline.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was just not a question, just to comment. I know we had a chat at the pre-agenda about podiatry and the sort of consistent level of complaints, and it doesn't really go down, even though it's been a long time since we've stopped the toe clipping service. But it was good to see, as a balance, a couple of compliments in there for podiatry. So I just wanted to point that out because it just proves that a lot of people are happy with the service. So I was pleased to see that.
Yeah, I think for those, the discussion earlier was just around the complaints about services that have not been provided for a very long time. It's quite difficult. And you had your hand up, but it went back down again. Do you want to come in?
Jacqueline was asking the same question, so I didn't think it was relevant to put up. Okay, thanks.
Always like to check just in case it's a rogue hand that's just disappeared and you still had a question. Yeah, it's a really helpful snapshot for us, and I suppose it does provide some assurance. While some of these, there's always going to be some negative interactions, and it is good to see the positives as well, and it gives us a healthy understanding of what's happening. So thank you for that, John. So the committee, we're just noting this report today and taking assurance from that. Thank you. That concludes our agenda formally for this morning. So the final item is just to confirm our next meeting, which should be in the diary for the 17th of November. So back to a Friday, isn't it? Our usual one. Fiona, sorry, your hand's come up.
It was really just a kind of final comment from myself to thank everybody for the tremendous work that's been put into these papers. There's lots and lots of information there that certainly gives me reassurance in terms of the areas that we're covering well, but also in relation particularly about the finance, the areas that we know that we need to cover as well. So it was really just to make sure that I've thanked everybody, because there's a lot of information in there. So thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fiona. That's given me a nice wee way to wrap up, and I see Alan acknowledging that as well. And I think particularly because formally preparing the annual accounts is a really important, it's one of the key things that the IJB has to do as a standalone body. So we're in a good position to recommend the approval following today's meeting. And thank everyone for that. And finally, thanks again to Jacqueline for handing over the role to me, and glad that she's staying on as vice to keep that knowledge. So we'll see you on the 17th of November, and in the meantime, we'll also try to get a date in the diary for our development session. So thank you all. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thanks, Max.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Margaret. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.